Welcome to this webinar on charity reporting requirements. My name is Michelle Crilly and I am a Governance and Charity Advice Officer with NICVA. And I'm going to be spending the next hour looking at charity reporting requirements, in particular for Girl Guiding Ulster charities. The webinar will last an hour, and in the webinar we're going to look at charity reporting. And we're going to look at the actual form that you need to complete called the Annual Monitoring Return. And after that, we're going to look at the content of trustees' annual reports, annual accounts, and an independent examiner's report. So by the end of it, hopefully you'll feel a lot more confident about going online and completing the annual monitoring return. And at the end of it, uploading these three documents: the trustees' annual report, the annual accounts, and the independent examiner's report. So what is an annual monitoring return? Well, it's an online form, so it can only be done online, and it's a requirement that registered charities must complete and submit on an annual basis. And it's really the chance for those charities to report on their activities during the year. It includes three documents: a set of accounts, a trustee's annual report, and a report from an independent examiner or auditor. And crucially, for the annual monitoring return to work, those three documents must be saved as PDFs and uploaded when you've completed the online form. There's a deadline for it, and it's usually completed within 10 months of the end of the financial year. And if you miss that deadline, in the past, it impacted on your status on the register. So if you missed the deadline and subsequently uploaded it, you were marked as due documents received late. If you missed the deadline and still hadn't uploaded it, you were marked as in default. And unfortunately, you can't see it there, but if you did meet your deadline, you were marked in green as up to date. So, in February of this year, the Court of Appeal upheld a judgment, a legal challenge to the delegation of authority within the Charity Commission. Specifically, the High Court judge ruled that decisions could not be delegated to Charity Commission staff, and decisions in the whole should be taken by commissioners or by committees with commissioners on them with delegated authority. So that all sounds a bit technical. What does it mean? Well, it means that decisions that in the past had been made solely by Charity Commission staff are currently considered to be void. And this means that any charity which is registered prior to the end of May 2019 is technically no longer considered to be registered. Now, even though they're technically not registered, charities registered before that date are still charities in law. It's not a registration which makes you a charity, it's your governing document. And if you were formed, as all of you were, for charitable purposes, then you're still a charity in the eyes of the law. The advice from the Charity Commission is that this is a technicality, and they're working with the Department for Communities to get it resolved. And they're advising charities to continue as normal. But there have been a number of practical implications, and that's why I brought it up today. So the reason why I brought the legal judgment up is because there's a number of implications, practical implications. The first one is that no reminders are being sent out by the Commission. So in the past, if you're a trustee, you might have got a text message or an email from the Charity Commission telling you that your deadline was approaching and to complete your annual monitoring return. That stopped, so just be aware of that. Second thing is that since the beginning of November, statuses have been removed from the register. So as I said a couple of slides ago, in the past, you would have seen some charities marked in default if they failed to submit. You would have seen other charities marked due documents received late. And you would have seen charities marked up to date or recently registered. Those have all been removed from the register. And the third thing that I think is really worth stressing is that online services are still operational. And the Charity Commission, if you ask them, they'll recommend that you continue as normal, and so would we at NICVA. So online services are open, and you can continue as normal to complete your annual monitoring return and upload your required reports and accounts. And that's what we're going to look at in this webinar. Before we start and look at the annual monitoring return, I just want to draw your attention to the resources page of Girl Guiding Ulster. And on this page, if you scroll down, you will see a clickable link to the Charity Commission monitoring form. And if you open this, it will provide some guidance in the form of a series of screenshots, which will show you what you need to do to complete an annual monitoring return. And you can also view that document on the Charity Commission's website. So one of the first hurdles that a lot of charities face is actually gaining access to online services. So there's a link that you can click, and the link's here. And what you need to put in is your charity number and the password that the Commission will have sent to you when you registered. Now your charity number will begin with 1. And one of the common problems I find is that sometimes people put in different charity numbers that they may have got from HMRC, for example, or they try to put in NIC beforehand. You don't need to do that. The charity number starts with 10 in all cases. And then the password. Now, it may well be that you had help to register and you have no idea what your current password is. And you have a number of ways of recovering that if that is the case. So what you can do is there's a reset password link. And if you click on that, the Charity Commission will send you a link which will allow you to reset your password, but they'll send it to the email address that they hold for you. And with a lot of Girl Guiding Ulster charities, that email address is perhaps somewhere in headquarters, or perhaps it's an email address of a trustee who subsequently left. So that can be tricky. If you need to change the email address that the Charity Commission hold for you, you have to email them and ask them to do it. Unfortunately, due to GDPR, they're not able to do that over the phone. If you're still having problems, one of the things that I find is clearing your cookies, because sometimes if you're constantly putting in the wrong password, after a while you find that even if you're putting in the right password, you can't get access. So clearing the cookies. And if you're stuck, you can email the Commission, or you can also get in touch with myself. Part of my role within NICVA is to help charities at this very important and crucial stage. So if you manage to log on successfully, you'll come to this welcome screen. And there are 2 parts to it: charity services and annual monitoring. Under charity services, you can view and amend your charity details. And under annual monitoring, you can complete your annual monitoring return. Now, what I would recommend that you do is that you check and amend charity details first. And the reason for this is that part of annual monitoring is to check the charity details. But if you need to make an amendment, you can't do it under the annual monitoring part of the form. You have to save and exit and come back to this welcome screen and go into charity details. So I'd recommend that you check your charity details before you start your annual monitoring. And most of those will be pre-populated. So using the information that you provided on registration, the Charity Commission will show you that information, and what they're doing is asking you to confirm it. If it's changed, so for example, if a trustee has left or you have new trustees, you have an opportunity to add those. So what we're going to do in the next couple of slides is to look at the information that you have to enter. Now, it won't look like this on the screen that you're using, but as you can see from this screen, if I was to use screenshots of the actual annual monitoring return, it's very small. So I've just typed up the information and I'm just going to explain on the coming slides what you need to enter. So, annual monitoring return has 3 parts: Part A, Part B and Part C. Part A, all registered charities must complete, and that's irrespective of income. So even if you had No income, you set the charity up and it hasn't yet operated, but you still have to complete an annual monitoring return. You still have to put in details for Part A. Part B, you must complete if your income is over 10,000. And if you're a registered charity and your income is over 250,000, you have to complete Part C. So for this webinar, I'm only going to look at Part A because I don't believe there are any Girl Guide and Ulster charities with an income of over £10,000. So Part A, as I said before, asks you to confirm charity details, organisation name, any other names you're known by, your registered charity number, and to confirm the contact details of the trustees. It asks about your area of benefit and your charity classification and your bank account. And all of these details are pre-populated and you're just confirming if they're accurate or not. And if, as I said before, you have an issue and maybe one trustee is left, you can't change it in this section of online services. So you have to press Save and Exit, go back to the home screen, click into Charity Details, and then go into View and Amend Charity Details and update the trustees there. Also, just you're probably aware, what you will see is a little P, and that will show you what information is public. So you do have to put in the name and address and date of birth of the trustee, but that information is not shared. Only the name of the trustee will be seen on the charity register. So the next part after confirming the details is the finance, and you'll get the financial period start and the financial year period end. It will ask you if this is your first financial year, and then it asks for your income and your expenditure. So your income is the sum of all of the income, all of the money that's come into the charity, and the expenditure the sum of all of the money that has been spent. If it's not your first full financial year, it will ask you for income and expenditure for previous years. There's then a question where it says, are the figures provided from consolidated accounts? Consolidated accounts, it's referring to group charities. So in your case, that's a no. In fact, in the case of most charities, that's a no. The next question then is about auditing. And it says, what are the basis of financial statements? Now, what that's really asking you is, how were your accounts prepared? Were they prepared on a receipts and payments basis, or were they prepared according to the charity SORP statement of recommended practice? And for the Girl Guide and Ulster charities, they're prepared on a receipts and payments basis. You use accruals accounts where your income is higher, and there are a few other factors, but for all the Girl Guide and Ulster charities, they're prepared on a receipts and payments basis, and you can just tick that. The second question is, what person or organisation reviewed the charity accounts? Now, that's not asking you for the name of the person, that's asking you whether or not you conducted a statutory audit or an independent examination. And again, in the case of the Girl Guide and Ulster charities, it's going to be an independent examination. Your income isn't, for all the charities that I've seen, your income will not be high enough to warrant a statutory audit. So just caution you as well, I hear a lot of trustees talking about audits. Audits are actually quite expensive. So, and they mean something quite different from an independent examination. So just be aware that you're not using audit because it could be misleading. You then need to put in the name and the address of the person who completed your independent examination. And the next set of questions asks you if that person raised any issues. So if they did, this would be your chance to let the Charity Commission know what they were. So some issues that I've seen raised in the past by independent examiners were that perhaps they felt they didn't get access to enough accounting records. So maybe they didn't see all the year's bank statements, and they've raised that as a concern. So it could be something simple, But if your independent examiner has had any issues or concerns with your accounts, this part of the form is where you let the Charity Commission know. And then you look in detail at the charity's details. So it asks for the number of trustees resident in Northern Ireland. And then it asks, is your charity registered with another regulator? And that would be the Scottish regulator, Charity Commission for England and Wales, or in the Republic of Ireland, the Charities Regulatory Authority. And as far as I know, there are no Girl Guiding Ulster charities registered with any other charity regulator. So you would just take note. And then it asks about area of benefit outside the UK and Ireland. So there's quite a few charities in Northern Ireland who are operating outside in different countries. For example, India is the most popular country that charities are operating in. But you have every country from Afghanistan at the top to Zimbabwe at the bottom. In the case of Girl Guiding Ulster, I haven't come across a Girl Guiding Ulster charity who is operating outside the UK and Ireland. So you wouldn't need to complete those parts. So if you said at the beginning that your income was above 10,000, Part B will automatically appear and you'll have to complete it. If your income was below 10,000, you won't actually see these series of questions. Instead, you'll be taken straight to the declaration. First question concerns the fundraising regulator. This is compulsory if your charity spends more than 100,000 on raising funds. So for most charities in Northern Ireland, it's not compulsory to join it. The Charity Commission would probably like you to join and pay a levy, but you don't have to. So you can click that you're not a member of the fundraising regulator and that you haven't joined the fundraising regulator. And when it asks why, you can just say that you follow the code of practice on fundraising. It will ask you if you are regulated by any other regulators or registrar, for example, Companies House or RQIA if you run a day centre. And then it asks about the number of staff. So for most Girl Guiding Ulster charities, you don't have any employed staff, so you just put down 0. And then it asks about the number of volunteers. Now, trustees are not to be included in the number of volunteers. So the number of volunteers that you have excluding trustees. And then it asks about charity assets. Then there's a section on trustee payments or payments to connected people. So it asks about how much trustees were paid and why. So were trustees paid for being a trustee? And that's a bit of a red flag to the Charity Commission. Most cases, very rarely do you see that. Were trustees paid for providing a service? Maybe a trustee is an electrician and did some wiring for a charity. Or were trustees paid for out-of-pocket expenses? And that's very common. And what you're asked to do here is to give the amounts. Then there's a section on any transactions with trustees. If the trustees have lent money to the charity or vice versa, any other transactions need to be noted here. And finally, a question on whether or not the charity is claiming gift aid. So if you successfully complete Part B, you then are taken to the declaration. And the declaration asks for reassurance on 3 issues. The first issue is that the trustees have all read and had regard to the Charity Commission's guidance on public benefit. And there's a paper on this, and later on we look at the link. The second question is around serious incident reporting. And what they're asking you is that if there have been any serious incidents, that you've reported them. So if you haven't and you're in doubt, you should get in touch with the Commission. And they have a quite detailed guidance on what would constitute a serious incident. Their bottom line is if you're in any doubt, let them know. And they'd much rather hear about something going wrong in a charity from the trustees than from a member of the public or reading about it in a local newspaper. And the third thing is that if you interact with children or adults at risk, that you have an appropriate safeguarding policy in place. And in the wake of the Oxfam scandal, the chief executive of the Charity Commission said that they were really quite alarmed that a lot of charities said that they did work with vulnerable beneficiaries, but they didn't have appropriate safeguarding. So they're now checking this quite thoroughly. So make sure that you do indicate that you have appropriate safeguarding policies in place. There's then a final declaration and an opportunity to upload the 3 documents that we've explained. Just to draw your attention, the wording on this is completed on behalf of all of the charity trustees. And then it's an opportunity for the person who's completing the form to put their name in. So you can get help with this. You can get someone to complete it on your behalf. But please bear in mind that it is the responsibility of the charity trustees, not 1 or 2 of them, not the treasurer or the chair, all of the trustees. And part of your responsibility is to make sure that any information that's given on this form is accurate. So you've completed your annual monitoring return and you're now in a position to upload 3 documents: Trustees' Annual Report, the Independent Examiner's Report, and a series of accounts. I just want to draw your attention to the Girl Guiding Ulster resources that are available under the Resources section of the web page. And what you'll find there is a template that you can use, a very useful template that you can use to complete your Trustees' Annual Report. There's also a template for your Independent Examiner's Report, and I would imagine internally that you're sent spreadsheets to help you to develop your accounts. And given that you're Girl Guiding Ulster charities, would strongly recommend that you use these templates. So the next set of slides is explaining what some of the information on the templates mean. So as I said earlier, most Girl Guiding Ulster charities will be completing receipts and payments accounts. Receipts and payments are simply statements that summarise the movement of cash in and out of the charity during the financial year. So a summary of all the monies received and all the monies paid out via the bank or in cash during the particular financial year. Crucially, it must include a statement of assets and liabilities. And if the Charity Commission were to check accounts, one of the reasons that they reject them is because they don't have the statement of assets and liabilities. So, an asset, what is it? An item of property owned by the charity, which has some value and which is available to the charity to use for its charitable purposes. It includes cash, bank accounts, if you have any debtors, land, property, and crucially for the Girl Guiding Ulster charities, equipment. Liabilities could be things like loans, overdraft, creditors, and for a lot of charities, they simply don't have assets other than the cash. So you can state that. You can say other than cash held in hand or at the bank totaling 3,500, this charity has no other assets and no liabilities. If you do have assets, for example, camping equipment, which may be worth money, you can just say that this charity has equipment to the value of £550. But without that statement or without some form of spreadsheet which calculates assets and liabilities, there is the possibility that in normal times your accounts could be rejected. If you want help, the Charity Commission has a number of documents on receipts and payments accounts, and NICVA, we also have an advice note on it. And Girl Guiding Ulster, I'm sure, will have some information and resources for you as well. If you like, we have on our website a template which you could use, but I would imagine that Girl Guiding Ulster have a template as well, and we'd recommend that you use theirs. So you've got your accounts, and then complete your Trustees' Annual Report. And we'd start with the year that the financial year that the report relates to. Make sure you've got the name as it appears on the charity and your Northern Ireland charity number and the principal address of the charity. And what I noticed is some other uniform charities were putting down the hall that their group was operating out of rather than the address that they use to register. So just be aware, it's not where the charity operates in. It's whatever address you used when you were registered. You have to include the names of the charity trustees on the date that the report was approved, and also any other people who may have acted as charity trustees during the year that the report relates to. Details of how the charity is constituted and its governing document, and in your case that's a royal charter. So the next section asks about your purposes. And for most of the Girl Guiding Ulster charities, the purposes are educating girls and young women to help them develop emotionally, mentally, physically and spiritually so that they can make a positive contribution to their community and the wider world. So I would just repeat those and then move on to the next question. And the next question, it asks about the main activities that the charity undertook to further its charitable purposes for the public benefit. And Girl Guiding Ulster recommend that you put in here statistics on how many girls took part in your unit, what events and activities took place, and what achievements there were, for example, what badges were gained. For the next section, it's the main achievements, and I think it's useful to think about this in terms of impact. What difference did your charity make? You should include a statement that shows there was no harm that flowed from your charitable purposes and there was no private benefit. So, for example, there may have been a trip, and private benefit would have been that the people, the leaders who accompanied the girls on the trip, benefited from going on the trip, but that private benefit to the people, those people, was incidental because the trip couldn't have happened unless they went on it. So that's the section of your report that you want to focus on. The next section requires a statement that the trustees have read and had regard to the Commission's guidance on public benefit. So it's a document that can be downloaded from the Commission's website, and it just talks about what are charitable purposes, what benefits flow from those charitable purposes, the fact that the benefit shouldn't be, or if there is private benefit, that it should be incidental, and that no harm should flow from the charitable purposes. But as a charity trustee, you're expected to have read it and to have had regard to it. And you can find a link to it there. The last section looks at the charity's finances, and it's a review of the charity's financial position at the end of the year. And you've put in here any details of any fund that the charity holds that's materially in deficit, and any steps that you were taking to eliminate that deficit. And finally then, a dated signature of one or more of the trustees. Just to watch out for that the figures that you put in here match the figures that you use in the annual monitoring return on the online form. Because when the Charity Commission check, if they do check, then they only check a small percentage. But if they check and they notice that this is wrong, and there's a difference between the figures in the annual report, trustees' annual report, and the figures that are entered on the online form, it's one of the things that they can reject accounts for. So just bear that in mind, and it's worth checking. So what I've given you there, and what you'll find in the template that Girl Guiding Ulster provide, are the bare bones. And for some charity trustees, they may want to put more information in, and that's absolutely fine. You can use this as a vehicle, as a means for communicating with other stakeholders. So some trustees will include pictures of activities and put a lot more detail in. But what we've gone through there are the basic details. And bear in mind that once that report is written or completed, that you must save it as a PDF. So you cannot, it's not technically possible to upload it if it's a Word document. So it must be saved as a PDF. So the final document that is required to be uploaded at the end of the annual monitoring return is the independent examiner's report. And the purpose of the independent examination is to provide some external scrutiny on the charity's accounts. And what it involves is that a person, an independent examiner chosen by the trustees, will review the accounting records kept by the charity and compare those records with the accounts produced and the trustee annual report produced. And they'll highlight any unusual items. Just to be aware, we talked about using the word audit. Charities with an income of above 500,000 must have a statutory audit, and that will exclude most of, if not all, of the Girl Guide and Ulster charities. So if your income is below 500,000, you can choose, the trustees can choose a person who they believe to be qualified and have the necessary skills to complete this. It doesn't necessarily have to be an accountant. If your income is below 250,000, so if your income is between 0 and 250,000, the trustees choose a person who they think is well enough qualified with the knowledge and skills to complete the independent examination. If your income's between 250,000 and 500,000, that person has to be suitably qualified, and there's a list of qualifications. And if your income is above 500,000, you must have an audit. And as I said before, some charity trustees erroneously talk about getting their accounts audited when they're getting an independent examination. So just be aware of that. And as I said, for most of you, you'll be getting an independent examination. And that's just what I went through there. Up to 250,000, an independent person who is reasonably believed by the charity trustees to have the requisite ability and experience to carry out a competent examination. So that person may be someone who works in a bank, perhaps the treasurer of another charity that you know, perhaps someone who has their own business or maybe works in a community development organisation. Somebody that you think is capable, A, and B, somebody who is independent, and that's critical. And as I said, if your income is above 250,000, they must be suitably qualified. So there's a form of words that independent examiners can use. So even in good faith, if they look at your accounts and they write a wee note to say that they've looked at them and everything's in order, that could potentially be rejected by the Charity Commission. So the form of words that they must use is here. I'm not going to read it out, but once they've conducted their examination and they've compared all of your accounting records with your accounts produced and they've found that they're happy, they can produce an unqualified report, and this is this form of words that they should use. And at the bottom of that, they'll put their name and address. It'll be saved as a PDF, and that will be the third document that your charity will have that needs to be uploaded. If you have asked someone to be an independent examiner, it is incredibly important that they read the guidance. And once they've read this, they'll get a good understanding of the sorts of financial records that they're looking for and the process that they should undertake when completing their independent examination. Just some troubleshooting. One of the biggest issues that charities face, particularly small charities, is that they do a nice set of accounts that documents all of the income and all of the expenditure. However, they forget about a statement of assets and liabilities. And if that is the case, the Charity Commission, if they spot it, and remember they don't check all accounts, but if they do spot it, the chances are it will be rejected. The other thing that I come across time and time again is that the trustees' annual report, instead of having all of the sections outlined, it is simply the minutes of the AGM. And that's, although very interesting, it's just not enough. You must put in the section, and I strongly recommend that you use the Girl Guide and Ulster templates on the website. And the final thing is that the independent examiner's report is not in the right format. So it's well-meaning that the person has done the work, but they haven't used the right form of words. And then lastly, a very serious issue, and that is if the independent examiner's report has been completed, but it's been completed by somebody who is not independent of the charity trustees. And when I came across a case where the trustee just let it slip that their brother had completed their independent examiner's report because he was an accountant. That's just not acceptable. And in that case, we recommended that they report themselves to the Charity Commission by completing a serious incident report. So your independent person, it has to be independent. So this slide has a number of resources on it. You can see NICVA advice notes, the top one there, on charity annual reporting, and then 2 documents from the Charity Commission. The second one is the Charity Commission. That is a series of screenshots, and that's also uploaded onto your resource pages on the Girl Guide in Ulster. And it can be very useful. For me, the writing's a wee bit too small. I find the third resource there useful, and what that is a video. So a video that you can watch anytime you like, which goes through this process, and it explains a lot of the things we've been talking about today. Other general online resources, in NICVA, we've plenty of advice notes which could be useful for all aspects of running a charity. DIY committee guide, again, lots of useful governance resources. Charity Commission for Northern Ireland, a lot of advice. It's sometimes too much advice, but a lot of advice on all of the aspects we're talking about today. And sometimes Charity Commission for England and Wales has advice which is relevant to charities here, although just be aware that sometimes it might differ. Just want to draw your attention to NICVA, the organisation that I'm from. For charities and voluntary organisations with an income of up to 20,000, it's free to join, and there are benefits to join in NICVA. So I'd like to invite you to join us, and you can do so at that link. And finally, I'd just like to thank you. Thank you for being trustees. Without trustees, charities wouldn't happen. And all of the good work and the way that lives are changed by charities just couldn't happen. So thank you for being a trustee, and thank you for listening. My contact details are at the beginning of the presentation, and I would be delighted if you want to get in touch with me about any aspect of this. We at NICVA would be delighted to help you with your charity reporting and with all aspects of governance. So thanks for listening, and bye-bye.